Okay, hi, I'm Arun Prakash, the CFO of Cerebri AI, and I want to introduce our speaker today, as she is a personal friend of mine. We met while serving on the Illinois Institute of Technology Alumni Association Board of Directors about 8 years ago, and I asked her to join us on our CEO's speaker series on diversity inclusion. So over to you, Jean.
Thank you. This is Jean Belanger. I'm CEO of Cerebri and co-founder. So today we have as our guest Andrea Berry. Andrea has an incredible voyage of discovery and work, and we're going to dwell into that somewhat this afternoon. Andrea is African American. She's a woman, obviously. She's an engineer. She's been a senior executive in one of the world's most important media companies. She's been responsible for over 5,000 broadcasts, live broadcasts of sports events in football, baseball, NASCAR, etc. She's won an Emmy for the highest honor in television technical broadcasting. She won an Emmy for her coverage of the World Series, the figure skating at the Olympic Winter Games in Lillehammer, Norway, and also for NASCAR. So first, Andrea, what we'd like to do is we'd like to get your view, your history, and where you're from, and how you got to be an engineer and an executive in a media company, and just take as much time as you like in terms of giving us your background, and then we're going to ask questions. The staff are going to ask questions, and we're going to relay those to you over the course of the next 60 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. First, I want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to speak on something that's very near and dear to my heart. And we also want to thank, we're actually, for you folks in Texas and Toronto and where else are we?
Washington, D.C.
Washington, D.C. We're actually in a real podcast studio because the production geek that I am, I wanted to make sure we had good audio. So thanks to the network studios for this. My journey was very, very interesting. I went to college. I kind of think I don't know if it's a technologist trapped in an artist body or an artist trapped into a technologist body, but I originally wanted to become an architect at school. So I chose the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, where I grew up. I grew up on the south side of Chicago in the hood, and my parents were very much advocates of science and technology. My dad worked at Argonne Nuclear Labs, and my mom was a biologist, and then she became a teacher. And we were always taught to be critical thinkers and all that. But when I was 10 years old, my adventurous mom, she did one of the best things that, we're talking about diversity. She did one of the best things that she could have ever done with us. It was crazy at the time. We grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, so our only exposure to people of a different color outside of ourselves was television. And my mom grew up in Toronto, so she had some white friends, but they were in Toronto. We only heard about them. And so we would see people in stores and all that kind of stuff, but pretty much Chicago at the time was extremely segregated. And so we lived in that environment. It was okay. We knew who we were. We were very conscious of our history and where we were coming from. But education was the thing that really was established in our home as to be important. And so when I was 10 years old, my mom, who is a Jamaican, her father, was a Jamaican immigrant to Canada. She actually wanted to move there. So she packed me and my younger brother up, and we went to middle school and high school in Jamaica. And the most fascinating thing for me, I think, was seeing Black people who were leaders, strong leaders, the prime minister, your shop owners, your business people, all that kind of stuff. So it put me as a 10-year-old in a spiral of, you know what, I can do anything that I want because I'm now seeing people who are doing everything. And in Chicago, we saw that too. There were great business people who were African American and all that, but they weren't so close to us. In Jamaica, they were close. And so fast forward, I ended up at the Illinois Institute of Technology wanting to do architecture, fell into double E, and then switched my major to computer science. So, but the thing that got me was not because I was good in math. I did engineering okay and computer science okay. But the thing that got me was actually broadcasting our classes to corporations around the Chicago metropolitan area. So this was pre-internet for all you millennials in there. We had computer science classes, but there was absolutely no
Google? No Google?
no
Oh, God.
internet, everything. There was no fiber transmission.
You
When I
had to
think
go to
about
the
it.
library.
You had to go to the library and read a book.
Oh, my
God.
God.
And I think my first computer was the Mac lunchbox. What do they call those things? Or the I don't even remember the name. But anyway, so you're gonna look it up, right?
Yeah.
So but we were Unix based back then. So I fell into wanting to do a work study program at school, and the highest paying one was actually broadcasting these classes from the classroom to Motorola, Bell Labs, all these surrounding businesses. Little did I know that this was launching a broadcast career, because we were learning about satellite transmission, microwave transmission, and all that. And we would set up everything. It would be a small studio just like we're sitting in right now. And we would do these classes. And as boring as they were, the fun part was setting and doing that. So what happened was, and I don't know if you younger folks understand this, but there was a big push in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was actually, I looked it up on Google this morning. It was something that actually President Kennedy started, was affirmative action. And through affirmative action, the new code word is diversity. Through affirmative action, it was instituted to ensure, and I'm reading, that applicants are employed and employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. And so it was enough for him to say in the 60s that, you know what, this is necessary. The civil rights movement was going on. People were becoming more educated, more qualified for these jobs, but they still weren't getting the good jobs. The HBCUs were producing a lot of doctors and lawyers and all that kind of stuff. The people who didn't go to HBCUs, like the historically black colleges like my parents, they were expected to be teachers, or, there was very limiting career choices for African American people and Latino people in that time. And so when affirmative action was introduced, there was a big push for corporations to do that, to make sure that they hired people. And NBC, I got to give them credit, NBC in Chicago, they decided that they needed some new blood on their engineering staff and their technology staff. And so they went to some of the surrounding colleges and got interns, engineering students, to serve as interns. And my dad, who was actually the affirmative action director at Argonne Lab at the time, was like, you're going to this interview because you don't know anything about it. I was just a freshman freshman year in the spring. He says, you need to do some interviewing because you have no interviewing skills. I didn't know anything about a job. I didn't even know what I wanted to be when I grew up at that point, my second semester in college. So I interviewed with NBC, and lo and behold, I got the internship job. And that summer, I was only 18. That summer, I was a camera person in a studio doing live news, Phil Donahue, and whatever show we did. And that initiated me to also do radio at school. And so I had my own radio show. So to say that I fell into it, yeah, I did. But I've stuck with it for all of my adult life. One of the things that was there was an old investigative reporter at NBC in Chicago, and he's passed along now. But the first day that a group of us from that affirmative action group, that NBC said, okay, we've done our due diligence, we've hired interns so that, we've got these Black and Hispanic and female interns and all this kind of stuff. The one, he pulled us to the side, and there were like 8 of us, and he pulled us to the side, and his name was, I believe it was Russ Ewing. He was one of the top investigative reporters back in Chicago. He pulled us to the side and he says, listen, you guys are here for one reason, because they want to fill a quota. This is the biggest opportunity you'll ever have in your life. Don't F it up. And I looked at this man at 18 years old, and he was way older, and I was petrified. And I went home to my dad and I said, that guy said, my father was a fan of his. He said he was freaking out because I had just met this guy that he's a fan of. But my father said, he's absolutely right. So that instilled in me that I had to really work hard to keep what I had, this opportunity that I had been given. And so when I graduated from school, CBS in New York recruited me, and I became part of their management production ranks. And that's where I had the opportunity to do to do all the things that I did. But the problem is that I was labeled smart, okay, but I was still a woman. And so there's all this second guessing throughout your career as to is she saying the right thing to. So you always have to constantly prove yourself. And sometimes that can wear on a person. And I think that one of the lessons I learned is not to take that wearing down personally. You just have to keep plowing through and doing what you're doing. And so what I did was they treated me like I was a prodigy. I started there at 23 years old, and they treated me like I was a prodigy. So I would ask all these stupid questions. And those stupid questions led me into being these guys' boss. And I remember when my boss, who was rotating us around the first year, he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I kind of want to go out in the field and do sports. That seems kind of cool to me." I was being totally facetious. I had no idea I don't know who was channeling me at that time, but I was being totally facetious. And about 4 or 5 months later, someone had retired. And my boss came in my office. He says, "I'm about to ruin your life or change your life." And I said, "Why?" He says, "I want you to go out on the road." And I had been doing studio work at the time, managing graphics and all that. And he said to me, "I'm going to mess up your life." And I was single. I had no kids. It was great. Living in New York City, living the life, as my mom called it, a buppy who doesn't care about budgets. I was just living check to check, that kind of thing. And so I went out on the road, and I was so green. And the thing that he warned me back then, because we didn't have the internet, because we didn't have resources to find things out, I was really learning from second generation TV people, because the people who were older did radio. So when you think about it, television is not a very old industry. And so those older guys who were probably, and this is 1984, those older guys who had been there 30 years actually started off with radio. I was working with guys who were doing the original Jackie Gleason show, the original Ed Sullivan show. Wow. These were guys who were pioneers in television. So that's who I really learned from. And it was humbling for me all the time, because I felt like I was a sponge. But all the time, I knew that they were treating me like a different Black person. She's not like the others. Okay? I had people asking me, "How come you don't speak like real Black people?" In other words, how come I speak English fluently, or how come I don't express myself in Ebonics term? Yeah, good grammar. And I retorted to them and I said, "My mom has a master's degree. My father was a physicist. We could not speak improper English in our home. We were corrected properly." And I said, "By the way, if I go to 79th and Stony Island on the south side of Chicago, I have to speak Ebonics, okay? So that's my other language, just like another person from another country would have another language." But it was insulting to me. I didn't know how to take that question. And then it made me realize that you're fitting in, but do you really belong? And that, to me, was a big shift. When people ask me that, "You're fitting in, Andrea. You're our pal. You're doing great. Your performance is good, but we still know that you're different. We don't know how to navigate your differences." And what happens in that case, people who are women or people of color, we end up adapting to them. They never adapt to us. And so what happens is when you're interviewing people for jobs, you tend to gravitate towards people you feel more comfortable with Not that you're prejudiced or have a bias. You do have a bias. There is a bias. Men have biases towards men. Women have biases. There's a bias, but there's a comfort level and a trust level. And it's because we were not brought up. Remember, I was brought up on the south side of Chicago. We were not surrounded in a diverse environment. And so my comfort level was to be around Black people. And it wasn't until I was in college at 18, living in a dorm room, that I actually intermingled very intimately on a daily basis with people of different cultures. And IIT was a very, very diverse school. We had Iranians, we had Europeans, we had Africans, we had Caribbean people. There was a lot of Asians, Indians. And so these became my friends. But when you looked at the university, they still had their pockets of people who stuck together. And so in a diverse environment, we have to really look at what is the value of us being diverse. We all have seen studies that corporations have justified their diversity initiatives because it's a good business decision. In the media, our take on diversity, because, you go to any media environment, especially in the technology and engineering environments, they're not diverse. When even as early as 2 years ago at Fox, I would sit in board meetings and I would be the only woman. Maybe there's 2 women, 3 women, but I was definitely the only Black person. And I could count a Latino or an Asian on one hand. So you definitely have a diversity problem, but that seems to be across the board when it comes to technology. And I attribute that to opportunity. While I was lucky to have opportunity because I had parents who forced education and insisted on education, and my mom was a teacher, so we got extra at home. Think of the plethora of children who do not have opportunity. We have data that says that less than half of our students that we're graduating now are not proficient in math, 12th grade math. We have data that says that less than half of those kids are proficient in English. So how can they compete in a global scale with students who are coming in from Europe, Asia, India? They can't compete with them. They can't hang in college. So when an employer is looking for a student after college, even if they were to give them an opportunity, are they really qualified? And so my thing is, what are we doing? Your company this is amazing that you're doing this, but what are we doing to make sure that our future workforce is prepared to do the types of jobs like in AI, like in VR, like in AR? What are the types of jobs that we are preparing our 5-year-olds to be able to take on? Arun, you have children. What are we doing to make sure that, you know what, if you are not prepared at 18 to be able to tackle college and go on and get a job or even start your own business, you're going to fail, and you're going to continuously fail. And we already know that the generation now that's coming up is not necessarily going to be as successful as their parents. And so that's a big problem in this country. And then with the immigration laws and the lack of diversity in the workplace, how do you manifest innovation? So here we have no preparedness in the educational system, and we don't have the level of the ability to be competitive in the global scale. So how do you get to the point where diversity can even be possible if you don't have people who are qualified? And so it becomes a vicious hamster cycle. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, in corporate America, are there issues? There's issues in the way women are treated. There's a lack of mentorship. There's a lack of sponsorship. And then when the diverse candidates come in, there's a big push, and a lot of people don't talk about this, is inclusion. Are you allowing them to have a voice? And so when we have women in meetings, examine how they are treated differently when they have a point. And it's an ongoing joke with a wife, that give your husband credit for the idea that you're instilling in him, and then it'll go forward. But if you're the one to push the idea, he's not going to listen to you, right? So I just think that if we can understand that we don't want to hire people just because they're people of color. We want to be able to position ourselves so that everybody is on an even playing field from an opportunity standpoint. And it becomes a case of not as what that person's color or their gender or their sexual orientation. It now becomes who is the best person that I can build the best team with. And you guys are talking about innovation and trying to attract projects and companies that are innovative. I don't see how you can have an innovative environment without a diverse point of view. And so that is, and you know, when the Me Too movement came out, even, you know, when you look and see who's in power, the biggest problem is that the men in these high positions had a boys' club going on. And they allowed this behavior to happen and continue through generations. To me, diversity is not just hiring an intern and giving them an opportunity. Diversity means you want to see vice presidents. You want to see decision makers. You want to see CEOs. You want to see people across the board who are diverse so that their ideas and their thoughts and everything are reflective of what this country is. And the media is so important because, unfortunately, we have really, in the media, we have really transformed the minds of people. We've destroyed a whole generation of kids through the media, right? We have a lot of power. When I was a lowly camera person in the studios in Chicago, I was like, wow, if I shake my camera up and down, I can ruin this show and they'll change the channel. Just think about that. So if a camera person is thinking that, what is a producer who's deciding what news to put on the air? What is he or she doing? I was in Chicago in 94. I ran the station, the CBS station in Chicago at this point. And there was a news story that says that there was a rapist on the south side of Chicago. And he's around the south side of Chicago and he's raped 10 women, you know, serial rapist. And I'm like, I just breathed. And I walked into the news director's office and I said, guess what? That story has just told me that I shouldn't go home. And he's like, why? I said, because the south side of Chicago is probably bigger than Brooklyn, or it's huge. And so Chicagoans also work along their neighborhoods. We're very neighborhood oriented. So if you tell me now that the whole south side has a serial rapist and he's going throughout the south side and raping women, I'm not going home. But if you now tell me that he is in Inglewood and he's only focused on the prostitutes in the street, well, then, okay, I'm not going anywhere near there, nor am I a prostitute, nor am I, you know, in other words, you're not educating the people. What you've done is because you don't know that neighborhood, you think the whole South Side is bad. And the media has now depicted that the whole South Side is bad. Well, even when you look at the crime in Chicago, the crime in Chicago is bad, the gun violence is bad, but you know what? It's been bad since the 20s, right? That's where Al Capone and the biggest gangsters, you know, and I'm not trying to dilute it. And I'm not trying to say that, yeah, policemen do target people because of racism. But let's get clear on what story you're trying to tell. And the media people, the one thing that I do like about media, and especially in sports, is that when they tell a story and they tell a good story, you're learning something. When they tell a story that's honest and true, you're learning something. The problem is that we've digressed from the real case of what journalism really is. And so by having diverse points of view, people get checked, right? You can't talk about my culture as if you're knowledgeable. Let me teach you and let me explain to you what it means to be a Black person on the south side of Chicago, or a white person in north side of Chicago, or in Los Angeles, the difference between South LA here and West LA, you know. So we have to have that camaraderie. And one thing I do like about the millennials is that you guys seem to have more diverse friends. And I think that's a great start, is by having the diverse friends. But as a corporation, partner with the universities, partner with the elementary schools in your area and see how you can improve upon their math programs and their English programs and those kind of things, so that you're tracking these kids from elementary school. We track basketball players. If you see a fourth grader who can shoot, right?
Tall.
Yeah, and he's tall. You track them all the way through college, but you don't track somebody who knows how to do algebra in fifth grade. And so that's a huge problem right now. So I don't know if you want to start questions.
Well, I
Yeah.
have one question.
Okay,
So
good.
the first question is,
Uh-huh.
if I was a woman, and I'm not obviously,
Uh-huh.
one of the last places I think I'd want to do any kind of work is in sports, especially male sports, professional sports, because of the machoism, the high level of testosterone, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. So how did that go? I mean, you're talking about the NFL. You're talking about the elite
Yeah.
male-dominated
Yeah.
areas of our society.
I like competition. More than anything, though, I like live television. And sports is the one television media.
Why do you like live television? Because
It's a high for me. When you are on that clock and that clock. Remember when Mike just said 2, 3? I get a pit in my stomach. It's like very, very cool. And so it's almost as if you're on a roller coaster.
So where
at
were
the
you?
top of the hour. I'm in the truck.
You're in the truck.
I'm in the truck. So I was a technical producer at the time before I became an executive. I was a technical producer. And what we are responsible for is all the technical aspects of that live production. So we start out going to an arena or a stadium with an empty parking lot. We bring in a mobile unit, which is a portable production studio, pretty much. It blows out on the sides. It's an 18-wheeler, 56, 60 feet. And it has your production switcher. It has all your audio gear. We unload all the cameras.
How many people?
Inside the truck, there's probably, could be 20. The last show I did a few weeks ago was about 22 of us in the truck. And that's not including the people inside the arena. So you have your lighting people, your audio people, your camera people. You also have different trucks for transmission. So we have to transmit either fiber or satellite. Right? No more microwave, thank God. Satellite or fiber transmission. And so to me, what I liked more than I liked the sport was the logical, systematic engineering process that it takes to do a live television show. And also the genre of television uses technology more than probably any genre of television sports. When you look at a dramatic show or a entertainment show, sports by far is the guinea pigs for great technology. And
What would have come first in sports, for instance?
Okay, when you're looking at a football game and you see the score on the top of the thing and it says, New England 0, and I'm wishful thinking, who's going to go to the Super Bowl? LA Rams 21, wishful thinking. That score is actually live data from the real scoreboard. And so Fox was actually the first broadcaster to create that technology. We call it the Fox box. And now you can't watch TV without it, right? You can't watch a sport without having that real-time sports all the time.
The little box in the corner.
And it says it gives you data. And so it doesn't have to be scoring data. It could be player data. It could be for a boxing match, how many punches he did. There's a lot of telepathic stuff going on. We're doing biometrics now. So there's a lot of technology. When you see cars going around the track for NASCAR, that's all data, and they're transposing it in the form of graphics. And also audio. We're big on audio. I've done figure skating where we put little microphones actually on the ice.
And you can hear
the
skates.
Absolutely. And even when you're dunking on a basketball, there's a microphone on that basketball hoop. So there's mics. So I'm very, very sensitive with audio now. I cannot watch television and there's bad audio. It would just my husband just laughs at me because I'm like, oh God, this is awful. And I have to walk away from it because I've been privileged to work with some of the best audio and video people in the country, people who have Emmys on an annual basis, who've created innovation from that. And the guy part, sometimes you have to rough it out. Some of the things that I've heard on the road, because I was literally on the road with these guys.
You were driving.
No, I wasn't. I was on the road with them for years, and they became my family. I had to draw the line, and women, please, I don't know how many women are out there, listen to this. Make sure that you stand your ground and stick to your core values, if you know what I mean. Okay? Because guys do talk. And so I figured out very early in life that I wasn't going to date any of these jokers. I grew up with 3 brothers, so I'm going to treat them like I've got 20 more brothers. And that was my safety net. But I'm going to tell you the one thing about working in sports and about being the only woman and about being the only Black person.
Were you literally the only woman in the truck?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I would deliberately, because at one point I would put the crews together myself. I would try to make as diverse a crew as possible. And I'm a firm believer that that person who is an A player is not not necessarily the right person to fit the team. Sometimes if you get a B player or a C player, they're better for the team and you get a better show. Sometimes if you have a prima donna, that person is so disruptive that they set the tone for team building. And so you have to look at that. But back to the being the only Black, the only female, the only woman, it can get lonely. And there were times when I was on the road and just in corporate settings, you can see, once again, do I fit in or do I belong? And that was my mantra when I examined my projects and things that I did. A lot of times I had to be very nervy. When I wanted to do the Olympics, they told me, oh, you can't do it. And I knew the guy who was doing figure skating, which was the biggest figure skating that CBS ever had. It was the Tanya Nancy one. That was mine.
Oh, wow.
And so when I saw that Tanya Nancy movie, I'm like, well, it didn't really happen like that. I was there, you know. But I asked my boss, can I do this? And he out and out said no. And I said, why not? This guy doesn't want to do it. I'm not doing the Olympics. I wasn't assigned to it. How come I can't do it? And he said, no, you know, I don't want you to go over there. I said, why?
It's too cold?
It was not as cold as Chicago, but I was in New York at the time. But he did not have a good reason, except for the fact in his head and in his bias, you're a girl. I want to protect. I don't want you to go out there and screw up, you know, or whatever it was, because he and I had a great relationship. He did not want me to go out there. And so I did the wrong thing of going to the producer and saying, hey, is there a reason why I can't go and do figure skating? I really wanted to do it. And he's like, no, I love working with you. Let's do it. And so I told him, I said, okay, we have not had this conversation. So I did one of those things, you know, things that you CEOs hate, right? And
that we do all the time.
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
what you're trying to say?
Yeah. But I went and he went to my boss and said, can Andrea do figs? And it was probably one of the best experiences. I mean, I was in Europe for 4 out of 6 months and back and forth and everything. And we had a great show, and the drama inside of that show was just amazing, to the point where they made a friggin' movie out of it. But and the technology there was very cool for the time, because that was 1994, I believe. 94. And you know, but sometimes you have to be nervy. You can't take no for an answer as a woman or as a person of color. Unfortunately, you have to know how to play it, because some people get insulted by that. I see in corporate America, especially in the media, where they are nervous about the power of Black men, and when they speak, and they're not comfortable with it. So you find that there's not a lot of Black male executives and thank God it's changing. Thank God we're seeing more movies that we're seeing more executives in places. But, you know, I have a lot of Black male friends who had to leave the industry or start their own companies because they were tired of getting punked over and over again. And it was just this comfort level. When they got mad, it was like a woman getting mad. You know, if a white male got mad, he was passionate. Woman gets mad, she's a bitch, right? Or if a Black person gets mad, he's an angry Black man. So we have to understand those dynamics, and how do you play them? And it is playing a game. Unfortunately, it's playing a game. It becomes an exhausting game. And I don't know anybody who's succeeded in corporate America who's not labeled it as a game, because they go back to their homes and they're back to their normal self again if they can shut it down. I was very good at being able to shut it down. But the roller coaster that I was on, it was a great ride. I loved it, but we are nowhere near where we should be in diversity and inclusion. And having that voice, I think, is more profound to me than just putting people of color in a place.
Yeah. We had an interesting question with that regard from one of our staff members, Phyllis. She asked, who Who do you see as a positive role model for young women today who are trying to find their way through the business world?
Mm-hmm.
Because you went from being technical to an executive,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and once you're an executive, you're in business.
Yeah.
And you said the politics, etc., the usual. So who do you see as someone who might be a positive role model today?
Oh, that's a good question. Try to think of some of the badass women I know. You know, a lot of people would say a Sheryl Sandberg, but I think after reading her Lean In book, there were a lot of things that did not apply in my mind to diverse people of color. I don't think that, so for her accomplishments, I think are good. But I don't know that that is the best formula for that. Um, I know this is such an obvious answer, but I am a huge, huge fan of Oprah Winfrey. Not just because she's a media person, but because I've followed.
She's from Chicago.
She's not originally from Chicago, but that's where she got her.
Yeah.
She wiped out Phil Donahue in Chicago. But
enough.
I've been following her career since she came to Chicago in the early 80s. And I was one of those folks who say, this woman's going to be big, you know. And when I finally got a chance to actually physically meet her, she was actually very nice. She wasn't snobbish or anything, but she is unapologetically honest about who she is. And she is very businesslike, but there's a human side to her. So I would say to...
when you say she's businesslike, what do you mean?
She's not afraid of acquiring new businesses. She's not afraid of when she took on that network, and we were watching, because I have friends at Discovery. It was a partnership with Discovery Networks. When she took that on, she had no idea that launching a network is quite different from launching a show. It's a different animal. And when you take a risk like that, that's what a good business person does. And now the network is thriving. It takes years, though, for any network to thrive. That's a normal business case. But she managed to be a strong businesswoman. She has a lot of investments, but she also is unapologetically honest. I just heard an interview with her yesterday. I treat my South African girls as if they're my daughters because I didn't have any daughters. And that's because I don't think I had the maternal, whatever it takes to be a mother. How many people would actually say that? And a lot of times women who become successful, you have to make choices about, do I want to be the hardcore mother? I'm a mother, a wife, and an executive. In my case, when I started having kids, I have 2 children, I had to come off the road. That was a hard decision for me. I'd been on the road for 20 years, and I had to come off the road because I can't leave a baby at home.
When you say on the road, like how much time?
I was traveling 4 days out of the week, and sometimes like March Madness, I was gone the whole month of March. October, when we do the World Series of the playoffs of baseball, I'm pretty much gone the whole month of October. And at Christmas, I would do Christmas NBA games.
I
would do New Year's Eve.
Yeah,
we get time off, but you know what? It's you don't want to travel when you get time off. Because you've already, you want to stay home. I just want to stay home. Yeah. And so, I had a cousin who's a flight attendant, and the family would say, you guys have the same schedule. She was a flight attendant. And matter of fact, we'd see each other in the airport sometime. But as far as a role model, to the young lady who asked that, look and see what that person is doing. Because sometimes people who are successful, do you want to emulate their success or do you want to emulate their balance? Because a lot of successful women that I've come across are unhappy because they missed out on having the children, the husband, or whatever it is that they thought they wanted, and they didn't have it. And they look up and they're 45 years old and they're still just working. So you have to, like, I go back to, what are your core values? And it's okay to do everything, but I don't believe everybody can do everything. And so the person that you're emulating, make a decision within yourself is, what do I want to be, and who do I want to be?
Another interesting question is, you're at the intersection of this. A lot of people think that there's too much emphasis on sports, especially in economically disadvantaged communities where education suffers.
Right. Absolutely.
And so, you've been at the forefront in sports. You just mentioned some of the most popular events in our country. So, how do you look at that in terms of the people, whether they're in the South Side of Chicago or elsewhere? It doesn't matter. Sports has become such a dominant topic of conversation, if nothing else.
Traditionally, the only thing that Black people seem to excel in, where they were really, really wealthy, sports, entertainment and music, and unfortunately drug dealing. Okay? And so when you're growing up in the hood, that's what you see and that's what you emulate. And also that's what unfortunately we think is good. When somebody speaks well, or they're good in math, or they're good in science, or whatever, as a young kid, it's not cool. So to me, we need to, the National Society of Black Engineers does this really well. When they have their annual conference, they have t-shirts saying being a nerd or a geek is cool. And so that's why STEAM education is so good with the A in it, advocating the arts. Because if that child is not math savvy, you have to train them to let them know that their ideas can trigger technology.
There are other things.
There are other things. So if their ideas can trigger technology, then they're marrying themselves with a technologist with their ideas. Steve Jobs was not a technologist. He was an idea guy, right? Yet you can't do anything without a stupid phone, right? So I think that unfortunately, it is sad. I try to tell my boys, you got to have a backup plan. And to your point, sometimes sports or entertainment was the only way that these kids could get out of where they were going.
Or where they're encouraged.
That's right. That was the only thing that they, education, because their parents didn't have it or their grandparents didn't have it. The only role model that they had was someone who came out of their neighborhood and was famous because of that.
Well, one issue that I'm very fond of is educational vouchers, where because when I was in primary school, I got to go to one of the best high schools in the province in Canada where I'm from. And so one of the things I don't understand, especially in the African American community, is that people aren't supportive of vouchers, and I've never been able to understand that, because if you're trapped in a bad school, there's nothing worse except having a bad family, I guess. But it's just like you're condemned to not be able to do all the things you just talked about. Yeah. And so I'm curious about your view on that, because that's not just an educational issue; it's also a political issue because of the back and forth. So I was just curious what you thought about that.
We just had a public school strike in LA that lasted a week plus. 6 days or whatever it was.
Because of charter schools.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, it was because the teachers aren't getting paid, right? They have classrooms that have 35 kids in them. It's a lot of stuff, yeah. But they hadn't had a strike in 30 years. When I was growing up, you could go to your neighborhood public school and get a really good education and go to college. There wasn't a 50% graduation rate from high school when I was growing up. Even the kids who were like, kind of dumb got through high school, you know what I mean? And so
and it was tougher.
It was tough, yeah, exactly.
It was tougher than it is today.
And so I think while I'm an advocate for great schools, my kids are in private school because that was my choice. Ironically, in my neighborhood public school wasn't diverse enough, so I took my son out. It didn't reflect what we want him to have. So we made a big push, not only on good curriculum, but good diversity for our schools. Those were our choices. But I think from a political standpoint, if we focus on improving those public schools or charter schools or whatever, you wouldn't have to do the vouchers. And I wish that all the kids who could do vouchers take advantage of it if the school is free and they can get there, because it is a great way out. But I also am an advocate of having access to across the board, even public education, so that there's schools here in LA that didn't even have books. They don't have proper computers.
Well, how does it get to that? That's the curious question.
It's mismanagement of funds, I think.
It's just like we spend a lot. It's not like we don't. The teachers' salaries. One of the interesting statistics I saw a while ago was In New York, over 40% of the budget in education does not go in the classroom.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so you look at it and you go, if I ran my business that way, if I, just the overhead would just, you can't succeed by being silly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And then you have the charter schools, which we all thought was going to be the saving grace to public schools. And then some of them are not even getting the scores that they should be getting. So where is that mismanagement? So I think they need to blow the whole system up and start from scratch.
Well, maybe you should tell them what to do. That might be helpful.
No, I can't do that. They would shoot me.
Alain from our team reminded us that the score for the Super Bowl should be Patriots 23, Rams 21, Rams 11.
No.
He lost his way a long time ago, so we're not going to hold that against him. So one of the other questions was language that's used. You mentioned that people use language in your trucks and in your on the road. Being on the road, you learn a lot about people.
Oh yeah.
I took 100 flights last year, so I appreciated your comments. When I'm home, I don't want to travel.
Right.
I appreciate it. So what are some of the things in terms of language that you've come across that might be helpful in terms of the things we should avoid or things we should do?
For men.
It was asked by a man, of course, yes.
Yeah, do not refer to your body parts when women are in the room.
That's a good start.
That's a good start. I had a director, and one of the best baseball directors that I ever worked for, and a camera guy was all over the place, and he was trying to record a play. And he's like, dude, you just left me with in my hand. And I looked over at him because I'm sitting next to him, and I said, did you just say what I think you said? And he said, oh, Andrea, I'm so sorry. Because when you're the only woman there, they curse and all that. I get that, the cursing. But when you refer to body parts, I'll give you a funny incident. Myself and one of my favorite graphic operators were
Gaffer, what is a
graphic artist.
Okay.
Yeah, she does character generation. So all the typing that you see, all the words and stuff, she does that. So, and she still works at CBS. She's one of my best friends, and we're on the road together, and she's part of my crew because I was in charge of the crew. And the guys in the maintenance, we have a unit and a B unit. A B unit, a part of the B unit of the trucks is a small portion of it, maybe about this, is the maintenance shop. So in the maintenance shop, these are where the truck engineers are fixing stuff or doing things or whatever. And in that maintenance shop, they had a Playboy calendar up. Now, there's 2 women on the crew, and they have this Playboy calendar up. So she comes to me. She's like, Andrea, they're at it again. They got the stupid Playboy calendar up, which had the pinup girls and everything. And I said, you know what? Let's go to the store. We go to the store, and we get a Playgirl. Remember Playgirl?
Yeah.
We get a Playgirl calendar, and we put it up right next to her area where she was working. And the guys walked by, and they said, Andrea, she can't do that. I said, well, then take the other one down. And they were so apologetic. So sometimes you have to be as tough and as in your face as they are, not to the point where you're evil and nasty, but saying, hey, if you can do it, I can do it, right? And they don't want to hear that. And so I say to the guys, refrain from the discussing your body parts, refrain from discussing what you did with women in the past. Also, meet with that woman and see how she really is. Some women have potty mouths. Therefore, you can talk like that around her. Some women don't. So don't talk around them like that. I had to fire a guy because in the next cubicle, he was having phone sex with his girlfriend very early in the morning, and it actually offended the women who were sitting around him. And I
He
told
may have had other issues as well.
Exactly. Well, he wasn't the best worker, so that wasn't, but these women actually ganged up on him and complained, and he had to get fired. Because, as you know, corporations are very sensitive about verbal harassment as well as sexual harassment as well as, physical. So I say to you, learn who your people are, develop relationships with the people that you are with to understand their tolerances.
What is your favorite sport that you covered? I was going to ask you that earlier. My apologies. I just really skipped over it.
I love figs. I love figure skating, but I know this is going to be weird because most people think it's boring. I like baseball and I like postseason baseball. And because I had a producer teach me. We were out in the field, and I asked him, why are the cameras in these certain positions? As the engineering mind, I'm like, there's got to be some logic behind. You got right, third base, first base, low dugout, high dugout, all that kind of stuff. High first, high third. Why center field cameras? He taught me the game, and I realized that by the time you get to postseason baseball, it's like a chess game. It's very much like chess. And so when I watch baseball, I think of, what am I visually seeing, and what story are they trying to tell me? Because every sport has a story. And so I like chess, and I love figs just because it's really cool.
Is that the drama of falling, or?
Yeah, it's just cool. I can't imagine even doing it myself.
It's incredible. Yeah. I agree. I had one other question.
Okay.
What are you doing now? You've retired from Fox, have you not?
You know what? It's funny because retirement is a stupid word. It's retirement from Fox, but I'm still busier than ever. And so I'm consulting with, I'm not a fight fan, but I was part of the team that launched a new MMA league called the Professional Fighters League. And we did a whole circuit.
You are a sports fanatic.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I like the live TV aspect of it. So I said to myself, I took a year off because I just needed a break. I was doing a lot of stuff. I do a lot of stuff for IIT University. I'm a trustee, and as Arun, I ran the alumni board. So I took a year off, got a life coaching degree, did wealth management. So I was just doing little things that I like to do. And then I said, okay, you got to get back in the game. And a producer called me and said, hey, I need some help. I need a technology consultant because these guys are driving me nuts. So I'm their technology consultant. Right before I came in here this morning, I was on a conference call with them, looking into New Year's. Mixed martial arts, which is a sick sport. I'm just here to tell you, it's a sick sport. It's a dangerous sport. It's exciting, crazy, fun, but it's something that I don't think everyone can watch. And there's 3 leagues. There's UFC, there's Bellator, and now there's PFL. So I don't know what other clients I have. I work with trade organizations. We do a lot of resource organizational work for sports community. I'm very deep into the sports community. I received a Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame award a couple of years ago, and that kind of spiraled me to be able to call almost anyone in the sports world, and it's very cool. So when you talk about artificial intelligence, those are things that we're looking at in sports. We had a group of Israeli startups that came in and did speed dating on what they're doing in media as far as media technology. And so anything dealing with new, innovative things. And that's why the diversity is so important.
Another sports. I have 2 sports questions, actually. Mm-hmm. The first one is apparently somebody wants tickets to the Super Bowl. Can you help with that?
I hear
that was your friend Arun.
I know the new nosebleed seats are. I heard on NPR the other day, $3,500 for nosebleed. They used to be $900, now they're $3,500, and one of the boxes was going for $375,000.
Wow!
So if you could split that up between 10 friends and just drop $40,000, you're doing good.
I think 10 friends going for 5 minutes each is probably more on the cheap seats. The other question was, as a technologist, do you believe that the camera should cover pitching? That covers pitching should be absolutely in line of pitcher and catcher, so we understand the exact strike zone.
If the camera is not there, you should have a device that is in line that can give you that on a replay. I like the pitching slow-mo camera when you take the ball and when the pitcher throws it and you're seeing that. To me, that's a very sexy shot, the slow-mo of that.
With the rotation of the ball.
The whole thing, because it's telling you what kind of pitch he just made, if you're a really crazy baseball fan. But the zone that they're talking about, there are perimeters of that zone. So it being dead on, it may not necessarily be the camera, but that device that's tracking that zone should be dead on. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
Interesting. And how do we get more women in umpiring?
Oh my God. Well,
same person asked that question.
Yeah.
He's the Patriots fan, by the way, just in case you're wondering.
Come on. You gotta, I'm a Bears fan, to be honest with you, but now that I live in LA and we didn't have a team for 20 years here, so I gotta root for the Rams. But I would love to see more women referees, more women coaches, more women umpires. I think that we have to address the leagues in that case about their diverse actions. My sons play basketball, and they had a female ref the other day, and my God, she was so good. Everybody was talking about how thorough she was, and so I don't know, maybe they're scared of the competition. And also those jobs have low turnover. So
Oh, they do.
oh yeah, they totally. Once you become an umpire for a team, they take you out on a gurney and you die in
And
that
because
job.
why is that?
It's a prestigious kind of job. It's not something that and probably and the nepotism too. When even down to the greenskeepers, their father did it, their grandfather did it. It's a lot of boys club nepotism in sports, unfortunately. So I think we need to challenge the leagues on trying to get umpire training for women, and maybe start when they're in elementary school, having a girl be the umpire in elementary school, and she becomes the prodigy, and they start a movement.
It's interesting because I watch English Premier League because I went to
Oh
school.
yeah, I love that.
I went to school in London, and they have a problem now in the EPL because the referee retirement age was lifted, and so they just don't want to go. So in essence, they you have to run a lot if you're a referee in especially at that level of the sport. So that's an interesting comment. Do you have any last thoughts before we go? Because I think we're rapidly abusing you of the time.
No, it's okay. I do have. I'm very glad that you're doing this. I saw some of your other pieces where I learned more about Judaism and Catholicism and all that.
Well, that was the whole point.
It was
Yeah,
really awesome. But I do hope that through this, your employees realize that people are just people. And people have the same problems and issues and accomplishments and all that. And we also have the same faults. And once we get past that, it becomes now, I want you for this job because you're qualified, you're educated, you're the best person for the team, and not looking at folks and accepting their different cultures. We can't dilute everything so that everybody's the same. That's boring. You want to accept the fact that you have a different culture from me and I have a different culture from you, but what can we learn from each other? And I think once we do that and establish respect in that way, we'll have a better workforce.
Yes, the interesting part about the first few podcasts that we did was to have everyone understand how other people who are not like themselves understand their moral compass and how they treat others, or how they were intended to treat others because of the family life with different religions, etc. And so now that we're getting into the more diversity and inclusion topics, those things are supposed to be a foundation so that you can help understand how to go about doing this. And if you're meeting someone who's not the same as you have some view that when you look at all of those podcasts, most of them operate pretty much the same. They have different vocabulary.
Right.
They have different, slightly different takes on things. But in the end, the respect for the individual is pretty much common currency across all of those. So we have one last question on sports. Just came in.
I need to come out there in Austin and have a sports.
How do you balance the tradition of sports versus technology? And of course, soccer is the worst offender. They have the absolute worst.
They're awful.
They're absolutely god-awful video replay, et cetera, et cetera. So what have you had challenges in that area?
It depends on the league. There are some leagues that are more innovative. NFL, excellent with change.
Except in video replay in the last 2 minutes of a game, but that's another problem.
Come on, give the Rams a break. But and the NFL throughout the years has been really good. NBA, good. Baseball, pretty good. Where these organizations have even started their own networks, right? And so the NFL, NBA, and MLB all have their own networks, and they have their own technology structures, which they didn't have when I first started in sports. A lot of concentration is on the product that they have. There's a huge push to make sure that they have proper asset management systems for archiving. So that's a big one. I think soccer, I still try to watch a soccer match, and sometimes it's like, okay, you're American, maybe that's how they do it. But even the MLS here, is not as innovative.
No.
And I think part of it is their corporate structure. They don't, the ownership and the conglomerate of the leagues and everything is quite different from the other sports. And I don't know if they've invested that much money.
Well, the problem in soccer is that FIFA dominates conversation.
Exactly, yeah.
And you must be FIFA compliant in everything you do.
Yeah.
And so the leagues that have the resources to be able to make changes are semi-hamstrung, whereas in football, basketball, etc., the leagues dominate the international organizations in terms of their ability to make changes. You mentioned March Madness. Was that fun to do?
Oh my God, yeah. But doing 16 games sometimes in one day is just insane. Or eight
You were responsible.
8 games.
You were responsible for that many games.
Well, yeah, because you start on Thursday, so you're in one city from like Thursday to Sunday. So, and then back then we also had WNBA. I mean, women's basketball prior to the WNBA. So you talk about smart coming out of the community. Before the WNBA started, CBS used to do the WNBA, the
Women's championship, yeah.
NCAA championship basketball for women. And that was one of our shows. And the thing that the producer noticed is that the women who played basketball, after they graduated, they had to go get jobs. They had to deal with a profession. The men aspired to NBA. So these women didn't have the WNBA to aspire to. So they were actually the more well-rounded athletes because they were smart. They were good athletes. They had to articulate themselves and everything whilst they pushed the boys through just because they were good in sports. So there was a huge difference. And the empowering thing about when the WNBA started was that, hey, these girls were already smart. So you're finding that the women basketball players and the WNBA, to be honest with you, you talk about equality, they still don't make the money that the men basketball players make. So a lot of them go off to Europe to play, in the off season so that they can make a decent salary. So it's pretty bad. Back to the soccer thing, I think that once Americans get more into soccer, I think the broadcasts will get better because of the competition. I have friends who do NBA over in China, and the way the Chinese were doing the NBA, the basketball in China, they were just following the ball. They weren't telling stories. They weren't doing, strategy sessions, telling stories throughout the game or whatever. And when the Americans came in, the Chinese were like, oh my God, this is amazing. Teach us. So I think we just have to teach folks the value of having better telecasts so that you have more fan engagement, because the hugest thing in technology right now is fan engagement. And so your fan engagement is really going to take you over the top with your sport.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time, and we wish we had more time to do this, but it's been incredibly helpful and useful and informative, and we really, really thank you for taking the time to spend with us. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thank you.